Take my life and let it be all for you and for your glory. Take my life and let it be yours.
Hello, Forever Family. This is going to be the last individual Connect group meeting that we'll have for the spring. We're going to continue to meet, but all the groups are going to meet together at the building for the next couple of months. In this final meeting, what we're going to be talking about is a very important subject. It's the difference between seeking to influence somebody and trying to control them. And that's a line that's unfortunately pretty easy to step over. Now, what's the difference between influencing someone and controlling them? Well, let's talk about influence for a second. How do you influence somebody? You influence them, I believe, through your teaching and through your example. And by your teaching and your example, hopefully over time, you will change how they think. You'll change their hearts and you'll change their minds. Now, when you change hearts and minds, what do? Inevitably, you change behavior. And so if you want to change somebody's behavior, influencing them, I believe, is the most powerful way you can do that. And I believe that's God's way of getting it done. On the other hand, you can seek to change somebody by controlling them. Now, when you seek to control them, you immediately change their behavior via control, but you don't, and think about this, you don't change their heart or their mind. It's like the little girl who's misbehaving in class and she's sent over to sit in the corner by her teacher, and she's sitting over there and the teacher says, "How are you?" And she says, "Well, I'm sitting down, but inside I'm standing up." You've controlled her, but you haven't changed how she thinks. You haven't changed how she feels. You haven't changed her heart and mind. And so the thing about controlling somebody is, yeah, you can change their behavior, but it's temporary. It's not a permanent change because their heart and their mind hasn't been changed. You know, I think a heartbreaking example of this is found in our prison ministry. When we got to Eddie Warrior, so many of the women that are out there because they've struggled with drugs, been addicted. Now, when they're in prison, the addiction is not an issue because they can't get the drugs. And so by controlling their environment, controlling where they're at, their addiction, if you would, is in a sense under control. The thing is, too often, as soon as they get out and they're no longer cut off from the drugs, immediately they go back on and they're right back where they were before, and too many times they end up back in prison again. On the other hand, we know anecdotally and experientially that if you can influence those women with the gospel of Jesus Christ and the teachings of the Bible, if you can show them a godly example, if you can love them as Christ says we're supposed to love them, you can change their hearts and change their minds. And when they give their lives to Christ and they come out of prison, they don't go back on drugs. They have overcome that addiction with the help of God. And so influence is a whole lot more powerful than control. The problem is, to be honest with you, influence is also a lot more difficult than control. It's a lot more challenging, takes more time. You don't change somebody overnight by your teaching and by your example. You can change them overnight if you control them. You know, a lot of parents, for instance, wrestle with the internet and the stuff that kids can see on the internet. And, you know, we buy filters and we try to control the time they watch, and we do all these efforts to control them, right? And I'm not denigrating that. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. We've talked about sometimes control is necessary in the face of immaturity. But there comes a time where what you've got to do is change their hearts and change their minds. You've got to get them to see that they have to self-discipline themselves not to watch certain things, not to get caught up in certain things. Yeah, that's hard and it takes time, but it's incredibly important because ultimately that's what matures them and, if you would, disciples them. And so as we talk about the difference between influence and control and being aware of stepping over that line, I think it's very important to keep in mind that influence long-term is what's really going to change people, and that's how Jesus works. Let me give you a brief example. During his ministry, multiple times, he catches his apostles arguing over who's the greatest, who's going to be in control. And as you look at how Jesus deals with that, it's not by trying to control these guys, by telling them, you're not going to talk about that, I don't want to hear any of this. When he talks to them after he's caught them arguing about something like this, he'll start teaching them about, guys, what's important is that we serve each other. What's important is that we not be like the world. The world's all about, who's got the power and who's got the influence, but that's not what we're to be about, guys. We're to be servants. And he teaches them. And not only that, but then think about this. Right before he's going to be crucified, what's he do? He wraps a towel around his waist, and he gets down in John chapter 13, and he washes their feet. And he gives them an example of servant leadership. And so they see his example, they hear his teaching. And I think it's interesting that you can read all through the book of Acts, you can look in the epistles, and I don't see any evidence of the apostles doing any jostling among themselves after that about who's going to be the most important and who's going to be the leader. I really think he changed their hearts and he changed their minds. And he did it through influence, not control. And so as we seek to help others to grow in Christ, whether you're dealing with your children or with a friend, a brother or sister in Christ, whoever it might be, let's understand, yeah, it's a challenge and it's difficult and it takes time to change people through influence. But that kind of change is the best because so often that kind of change is permanent. It's easy to want to fall back on the easy way, which is just to control them and tell them this is how you're going to do it. But if you don't change their heart and you don't change their mind, that's always going to be a temporary fix, and that's all. I hope you have a really fruitful discussion about this very important matter this evening. God bless you. Thank you.
Glory to God forever.